All right. So if you're ready, Maggie, why don't we just get started with you introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Maggie Vanoni. I currently cover UConn women's basketball for Hearst, Connecticut Media here in Hartford, Connecticut. I graduated from Oregon in 2019. I covered Oregon sports for the Daily Emerald since my junior and senior years. Big advocate of the Daily Emerald and big advocate of the SOJC's track bureau program as well.
And how old, like what age would you say you first got interested in sports reporting?
Yeah, so I went to Oregon because of the journalism program. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really know what that meant and what that looked like. And then my end of my sophomore year, I saw a flyer for the SOJC Track Bureau, taught by Lori Shantz, who was a phenomenal professor, a phenomenal woman, one of my favorite people ever. But I love track. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so track was a really big thing with Nike, and Oregon is the place to be if you like track. So I thought, well, might as well just like try it and see what sports reporting is. I had no idea what that really meant. I took the class and I fell in love with it. I got to be there and cover these live meets, my favorite sport in person. I got to go to high school, professional, college, even just community track events. And it was so much fun because you're getting to just you kind of compete in a sense with yourself against the deadline instead of racing on the track. It's you versus the clock, or making sure your quality is good as well. And I just fell in love with it. And then I think 2 weeks after that class ended, I applied for the Emerald and got a job as a sports reporter.
Wow, yeah, to cover track in Tracktown, USA, that must have been really surreal. But I don't want to say, the lion's share of the Emerald is the sports desk because it's not. But this definitely is a sports school, so it's a big part of it. You mentioned the influence of Phil Knight, um, among other things. So I'm just curious, like, did getting your start at like a flagship sports institution like Oregon help you in your post grad career?
Oh, absolutely. I think Oregon's a great place just to get your hands going with sports journalism. There's so many different programs, and a lot of those programs have very historic backgrounds, right? You have Oregon football, which, growing up in Oregon, you know about Oregon football since the time you're born. You know about Chip Kelly, you know about Mariota. And then you have their women's basketball program and their men's basketball program. You have, teams like softball. You have programs that are so unique, like acrobatics and tumbling, that you just get a really good variety of super popular sports that are really heavy and hard to cover versus super niche sports that are just as hard to cover but in a different sense. And you get to deal with, you get hands-on experience dealing with SIDs, dealing with local media, watching and observing how the real world works. And it was a great place to start sports reporting.
And you worked at a time when like Duck royalty, like Justin Herbert was there, Sabrina Ionescu, Peyton Pritchard, people who were just taking over the NCAA in their respective sports. Uh, how do you think that affected the Emerald specifically when there was so much press coming from, not just local media but national media?
Yeah, it definitely made, I think, our job more challenging, but in a fun way, right? Like you're having national media come in and jump in, covering Sabrina or covering Justin, and you're to yourself, you're thinking, okay, what is a local angle that only I can tell as a student reporter? What is something niche about these athletes that maybe is not that known that I can tell that story because I'm on the ground here on campus watching these athletes. And it was really fun. You also get just to network too as a young reporter. You're getting to network with professionals who maybe you read, maybe you've heard of, and watch how they ask questions in scrums. Watch how they interact with athletes, what they do when they're on deadline. And that was really eye opening just to see what it looked like for when we would graduate in a couple years and go into the field.
hmm so you mentioned you came in, really track was kind of your sport. That's what you fell in love with. I also report sports here at the Emerald. I produce the Emerald Sports podcast. And it was a little difficult for me getting into, baseball, softball, women's basketball, because I didn't really have that base knowledge going into it. So I'm just curious, was there a sport like that for you?
Yeah, I to me it was a little bit of tennis, a little bit of volleyball as well. Volleyball was actually my first beat with the Daily Emerald. I am 5'2". I have never played volleyball. I did not get blessed with height or good reaction. So having that be my first beat, I had to learn a lot, right? And I spent weeks before the season started and researched what the volleyball is, right? Learning the rules, learning the terminology and the vocab. And that I was also very honest with the athletes. I was like, hey, I've never played. I'm asking questions, but I'm also learning. Like, what
Hmm.
is the kill the same thing as a strike? Like, and being very vulnerable. And I think athletes always appreciate that when you're not trying to pretend you know something when you don't. And I literally learned how to be vulnerable and how to learn on the fly as well.
Hmm. So let's shift a little to your post graduation. After graduating, you interned at the Seattle Times, covering UW along with some of the professional schools in the area, like the Seahawks and the Storm. So did you feel that jump going from collegiate sports to professional sports? Was it a little like shocking at first?
Definitely.
Jarring?
Yes, jarring is a great word, especially when you are fresh out of college in your first professional locker room. Very jarring, especially when you're 5'2" and you're with Seahawk players and Mariner players who are the height difference is very jarring.
Right.
But it was really fun still, and I'm so thankful for those opportunities. They were incredibly challenging. And it's a different sense of, you're a sports reporter and you understand kind of getting lost sometimes in arenas, not really know where you're going. But when you put that on a scale of a professional sport, it's a little bit more chaotic, but also really fun, and I like covering the Storm. Those games are my first games writing on buzzer, which means turning a story the minute the game is over. We didn't really do that at the Emerald. We always had a little bit more of a buffer to turn stories in because we were learning.
Mm.
And so really figuring out how to digest a game, how to write it out clearly, how to pick out the best parts and not make it so chronological. That was really challenging, and I definitely struggled a lot with it, but getting so many reps for my internship really helped a lot for when I could move on and become a full-time reporter.
Yeah, was the level of access any different? And you mentioned you were in the locker room, so I mean, obviously you were pretty up close. Uh, but I mean, going from covering a school at or a paper, sports at the school that you went to college, and then going to Seattle where you didn't really have any familiarity with anybody in that area, was the access a little different?
Yeah, granted, this was before COVID, so we had
Mm,
access to locker rooms, but no one really cared. But it was definitely different. You go from an SID to a PR person, right? And the PR person does the same role as an SID, just on a different kind of scale. And I mean, it's different per sport, right? For baseball, for the Mariners, you would come in, you would get, pre-game access locker room with the players. Some of them were able to talk, some of them just did their thing and didn't want to talk. Some of them were in pregame mode and kind of blocked out with the media. And then after game, you got the locker room as well, and that was definitely learning what to ask in the situations, right? Like for a pregame, I'm never in college. We never had pregame media. Like, what does that mean?
mm,
What questions am I supposed to ask them if the game hasn't started yet? And really learning how to take that stuff and save it later for features, right? Or remembering a really good quote from a pregame, and then that player does well during the game and bringing it back up. That was really fun and really eye-opening. And I think, going into basketball, we got some pregame media, like a shoot around that was open access at practice. We got to go to practices and watch 10, 15 minutes and talk to the players. Whereas, yeah, we got practice media at Oregon and we got to watch 10 minutes or so, whatever, but it definitely wasn't as open, right? And
mm.
I could grab Sue Bird one-on-one. I could grab, Natasha Howard one-on-one. Whereas in Oregon, as a student reporter, you're not really going to have a lot of those one-on-ones with the bigger stars, like Natasha was that season
Mm.
for the Storm.
Is there a specific interview that you can point to that maybe was especially bizarre, or just like any favorites that you have? I mean, you were up there. You mentioned Sue Bird, Russell Wilson must have been there at the time. Any interviews that are your personal favorites?
Yeah, I apologize also for the buzzing. Um, I
Totally
can't
fine.
turn on Do Not Disturb because I'm kind of waiting for breaking news. So I apologize about that.
Oh,
Um,
good.
but I actually did not get to interview Russell Wilson just because of what my assignments were that season. I
Hmm.
wasn't quite with him yet. But it was really fun talking to Sue Bird. But Natasha Howard, I felt like was a lot more of an opening interview, or not opening, challenging interview, just because learning how to deal with sensitive subjects. Right, that summer she was actually her ex-girlfriend had accused her of sexual violence, and there was this whole just there was a lot of back and forth between the different sides. It went to court. So learning how to ask appropriate questions and learning when to ask them, right? Maybe not bombarding somebody out of the blue of, hey, this happened, tell me your thoughts. That's inappropriate, especially right after a game. And learning, when to back off and the athlete clearly doesn't want to talk about it. That was really challenging, but it also grew me a lot as a reporter in my language and how I interview people.
Hmm. So moving on, I mean, you've literally worked up and down the West Coast. You were in Oregon, you go up to Seattle, then you go down to LA and work as a beat reporter for UCLA athletics. That's three Pac-12 programs, and each one in like a progressively big media market. You go from little Eugene, then you're in Seattle, and then you're in Los Angeles, which is, the top, if not top two media hub in the US. So how was kind of climbing the ladder as far as media outlets? Like, how was that? Was that also a little intimidating at first?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it climbing the ladder, just because, no offense to UCLA, but in terms of the market in LA, they're not the biggest program. You have the
Fair.
Lakers, right? You have the
Yeah.
Clippers, you have the Chart, you have all these other big time professional programs. Even high school football was a little bit bigger sometimes. But it was really fun to be in charge of my own beat, right? And when I was covering UCLA for the Orange County Register, I was in charge of all their sports, not just basketball, not just football. I got there the last week of the football season of 2019, got a game under my belt, and then it was basketball season. And I
Hmm.
covered, but during that, it's also getting ready for softball. It's also gymnastics season. And I knew nothing about gymnastics. So learning that as I was going. And unfortunately, COVID hit, the world shut down right before the Pac-12 tournament in March. But that was just, it was really cool and learning, what does well leadership rise, right? Like, yes, UCLA women's soccer is phenomenal and they're a great program. They just won. They're really good and they're historically really good. But compared to the historic history of the men's basketball program, it might not do as well leadership rise. But then gymnastics, no matter what you write about gymnastics, it's going to blow up because they have so many fans in their Olympic presence. Um, so that was really cool, learning what does well and what doesn't, and how to make the sports that don't do as well do well.
Hmm. Okay, so from Eugene to Seattle to LA and now Connecticut, you're working as a beat reporter for UConn women's basketball all the way over there on the East Coast. And anybody who follows women's basketball knows that UConn is like the powerhouse. I mean, it's what Alabama is to college football. That's UConn. So when you found out that you got that job, can you just take me through the emotions? I would think just, pure excitement followed by maybe a little bit of nerves.
Yeah, so I unfortunately with COVID got laid off of my job at the Orange County Register in LA. And Hearst, Connecticut was the first one to really, offer me a next job 8 months or so later. And originally I was just a general assignment sports reporter for them. I was covering high school. There's a lot of local colleges here. There's Fairfield, there's Quinnipiac, there's Hartford. So there's covering just a lot of lower level sports compared to UConn. I remotely covered the 2020 Olympics for us because there was a lot of Connecticut athletes, or athletes of ties to Connecticut in the games. And then about 8 months later, I got moved over to the UConn beat. And it is the funnest job in the world, but it's also the most challenging job I've ever had. It is UConn women's basketball. Yes, there is a Connecticut Sun here. There is a pro team here, but this is the team here in the state. Is the UConn women's basketball. It has been since before the Sun were here, since before they moved to Connecticut.
Hmm.
And you have stars like Gino Oriema, you have Paige Beckers, you have Chris Daly, you have AZ Fudd, you have their alumni, you have Sue Bird, Brianna Stewart, Diana Taurasi. Like, it is such a well-known beat that it's very challenging because everything you do gets read. You're constantly competing with national media for the headlines, for the breaking news. It's not just you at a game, right? There's cameras. There's all these people from all over the country trying to learn more about this program and cover it. And with a program so big, we have to have stories every day in the paper about UConn because our readers want it, because that's why they subscribe to us, is to get UConn women's basketball news. Um, so definitely, like, last year was my first season and it was really hard to get used to. It's a huge time difference. We traveled to about 90% of their games on the road and at home. And it was a lot, but now in my second year, I feel much more comfortable and I feel much more at ease with the responsibilities of the beat.
Hmm. So you talked about your favorite interview. Is there any feature story or profile or anything that you've done, whether it be for UConn or for any of the jobs you've had over here, that holds a special place in your heart?
My favorite story is also my most challenging. I say that a lot, but I love challenges because I love growing. It's really cheesy, but that's how you get better and how you develop. I did a story. I started a story in April or no May of 2021 and finished it pretty much April 2022. It was about this high school couple who were athletes here in Connecticut and then got in a car crash. The boy unfortunately passed away in the accident, but the girl kind of had to restart at life, right? Like she had severe brain trauma. She learned how to walk again, learned how to move her muscles again. And it was just, it impacted this whole tiny town in Connecticut. And just, I got to be there firsthand. You know, I got to go there when the girl returned home the first time after 6 months of staying in the hospital. And that's a really hard story to tell. And it was really hard. You know, there were multiple days where I had to deal with this really heavy stuff and then go cover UConn women's basketball. And not that UConn women's basketball isn't heavy, but it's totally different, right? Like you're dealing with high school, a life or death situation, and then you're dealing with UConn winning the Big East tournament, which is great, but just not on the same scale. And it was really challenging. You know, we went through a lot of copies of that story. I really like Lori Shawns was awesome in helping me learn about trauma reporting and learn about trauma interviewing and how to ask questions and how to give space and how to give respect. That it was really, really hard, but I'm so thankful for that story and that those families opened up to me and trusted me to tell their story. It's one of my favorite ones I've ever done.
Have there been other areas of journalism other than sports media that you've had interest in maybe branching out into?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I love feature writing, and I think that can go with any kind of beat. I think that's really fun. Um, I don't know. I've done a little bit of news reporting. My first internship was at the Register Guard, and I was a breaking or not breaking, general assignment news reporter. And some days were fun. You know,
Hmm.
or hightailing yourself to a fire, reporting on a fire. But then other days you're reporting on a recycling event, and it's just kind of different. So I don't know. I think I really enjoy sports a lot, especially college athletes, covering college athletes because they're so human and they show that with everything they do. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the professional realm of sports. So I really like having and being able to highlight like, look, these are people. These are young 20-year-olds figuring out life just as much as all of us are, but they're on a higher stage doing it.
Hmm. Yeah, and you've been working in this industry for 6, 7 years now. Uh, yeah, sorry, I don't mean to rattle you there, but when you're off the clock, you're watching, I don't know, like Sunday Night Football or the World Cup or something. Do you ever find, the notepad coming out just out of habit? Like, is it difficult to consume sports when you're not working?
I really like the question. To be honest, I get really sported out really quickly, especially basketball. Like I love watching March Madness as much as anyone else does, but I cannot watch the NBA because like I was just too much basketball. I'll watch the W, but I've also have never been the sports fan to watch every single game every single day. And there's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
that. A lot of my friends do that and that's great and phenomenal. I just get so worn down and I need to have space. I love sports. I love my job, but it's also a job. It's not who I
Right.
am. It's not me. It's not going to define my life. And so having a kind of a life outside of sports is really important to me. And I really try to prioritize that throughout the week. If I have an off day, I don't turn on sports. Maybe I'll go for a walk. I'll read a book. I'll binge whatever I'm binging on Netflix. Right now it's Hannah Montana. I'll be real. And just trying to create the separation really is really healthy.
Hmm. All right, Maggie, we are about at time, but before I let you go, I just want to ask you one more question we have. It's a recurring question for Ode. If you had to go back, you know, 6, 7 years when you graduated to, young, bright-eyed Maggie just starting out at the Emerald, what's one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would tell myself that it's okay to ask for help. I think a lot of times I felt like I knew what I was doing or like I could do it. And sometimes I could, but a lot of times I couldn't. I needed the help, whether it was another set of eyes on a story, whether it was talking out a story before filing it, whether it was, going about an interview that wasn't quite sure how to ask a question. I think as a college reporter, you get so excited, right? And you're like, I can do this. I'm so excited. I get to talk to XYZ athlete about XYZ topic. And maybe you say the wrong thing on accident and you don't know that. So really taking a pause and asking for help, even just, hey, I'm going to talk to so and so about these sensitive subjects. Do you mind looking over my questions? Or what would you ask them? I think that would have really helped me slow down a little bit and broaden my landscape of how to do this job.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. Great
Of
conversation.
course. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.